Using graphics to display information visually enables you to communicate complex ideas clearly and accurately, provided you follow certain rules. While technological tools are a valuable aid for organizing information according to a type of visual display, there is a danger in blindly trusting these tools without taking some steps to make sure that good visual display practices are respected. For example, the predefined models in common software programs regularly disregard the golden rule of any visual display. That is, an optimal information to pixels quotient, which implies conveying the maximum amount of information with the minimum amount of pixels. Given this rule, visual gadgets such as three-dimensional columns of data or curves do not help viewers interpret a chart. They draw the viewer's attention to the cosmetic aspect of the design rather than to the information transmitted, which considerably hinders the analysis. Therefore, they should be avoided. Here's a quick overview of the structural elements that a chart should contain, followed by a series of tips that will help you regain control of your tools. A chart contains the following components: a title, 2 or 3 axes depending on whether the chart is in 2 or 3 dimensions, values at regular intervals along a scale as well as the axis title corresponding to the scale units, categories and their scale units in the form of an axis title, a legend when several series of data are displayed, the source of the data, and of course, the data themselves that may be marked with labels or not. Obviously, some types of charts do not include all these components. For example, pie charts, which do not have axes, or geographic maps that must contain a scale. Generally speaking, we have just seen the key components of a chart. Now, here are a few tips to follow to make your charts as effective as possible. Tip number 1. Show the data. In the following example, it is very difficult to interpret the graph on the left while a clearer pattern emerges on the middle chart. However, the meaning produced by the chart on the right is more effectively and quickly intelligible. Yet exactly the same data were used. Only the scale was adjusted to show the data, that is to display them in the staging of the chart so they build meaning. Tip number 2. Avoid distorting what the data have to say. The following visual display tells you that since the installation of an antivirus on your computer last week, the number of threats has fallen dramatically. But that is not what the actual data have to say. This is a distortion of scale, since the same display detailed this time on a daily rather than a weekly basis shows an increase in the total number of threats. Be honest. If your charts contradict your arguments, don't change your charts, change your arguments. Tip number 3. Present the maximum amount of data in the smallest amount of space. Very dense information can be represented in a very small area without losing clarity. For example, the following map uses colored dots to pinpoint certain elements on a given territory and in a predetermined time period. Although these dots lose their sharpness when the map is shrunk, the regions where the target elements are more highly concentrated show up that much more clearly. That is precisely the information we want to show using this type of document. Tip number 4. Make large data sets coherent. Let's take the example of the development of the human embryo. A data table is a good way to document the different stages, but it is not user-friendly to consult and a comprehensive picture does not emerge. To visually and coherently represent human embryonic development and the large amount of information involved in this subject, why not simply use an evolutive image and perhaps put the corresponding data chart in an appendix? Tip number 5. Encourage the eye to compare different subsets of data. Histograms and area charts, among others, are well suited to this exercise as they enable you to juxtapose the visual display of the different data subsets or to layer them either by comparing the contribution of each element to a total or by comparing the proportion in which each value contributes to this total. But be careful to avoid excesses. For example, having more than 3 or 4 trend lines in a line chart makes the chart difficult to decipher. In a histogram, having too many lines can mean that they will be too thin and close together to be easily legible. Tip number 6. Reveal the data in several levels of detail. That way, people who consult your charts can focus only on the fundamental part of the information, or they can explore the fine structure if the content interests them. This is one of the advantages of what are called pie of pie charts, which enhance the legibility of small percentages by combining them into one sector that is then subdivided into a second level of detail. And finally, tip number 7. Avoid flourishes. That means it is better to choose abstinence in graphic displays and to refrain from using decorative shapes, patterns, textures, and shading that offer no added value to what you are trying to communicate through the visual display of data. If you can reduce or delete a visual element without hurting the interpretation of the whole graphic, do it. For example, what this chart is trying to communicate is still accessible even though the vertical grid lines are removed. The background color brings nothing to the information conveyed. The frame around the plot area is of no value. As for the horizontal grid lines, they can be deleted and replaced by discrete lines placed directly on the bars. Between the original version and the simplified version, which one do you think is the clearest? This final example illustrates the advantage of implementing the golden rule of information to pixels quotient. By expressing the same data while using many fewer pixels, the chart attains its optimal form. All of the tips provided in this video may be difficult to memorize in detail. Watch the video several times whenever you need to and take notes. These tips can be summarized as follows. Try to provide the maximum amount of relevant data, simply and clearly, in the smallest and most visually simplified space possible, while including all the structural elements necessary. Graphics are essential complements to your assignments, and they back up your ideas. Therefore, you have to be diligent and pay close attention to detail when making them, because clear graphics reflect clear ideas.